Good evening. Hello, 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 and welcome. Welcome everyone to a brand new episode of Church Talk, critical conversations for church leaders. Your go-to place where faith meets innovation and community. I'm your host tonight, Myra Bellinger, and I'm so happy to be with you. And we're diving into an incredibly exciting topic tonight. Thank you for joining us. Our topic is faith funds empowering churches through smart funding. But before we get into the heart of our discussion with our amazing guest tonight, want to do a quick reminder. If you are loving what you're hearing already or anticipating that you're going to love what you hear, we want you to go ahead right now and hit that share button. Spread the love with a like, if you will, and don't hesitate, please, to drop your comments and your thoughts and your questions in the comments section. We're all about community here, and we're happy to have you. And your voice tonight is a big part of the conversation. So, are you ready to be inspired? I know I am. Let's get started tonight. Let's get started. We have three amazing, awesome guests joining us for this conversation tonight. We have the Dr. Shanika McIver. We have Reverend Dr. Carlos Perkins, and we have Reverend Kerwin Webb. And we're going to allow them to come on screen tonight. We want to introduce you to them, and we're going to allow them to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about themselves. So welcome, Dr. Shanika, welcome, Dr. Carlos, and welcome, Reverend Kerwin. Are you guys ready? We'll start in that order. Why don't you tell us a little bit about you? Dr. Shanika, ladies first.
Hello, everyone, and good evening. I'm really excited to be here. I'm Dr. Shanika McKeever, the Chief Creative Officer of the McKeever Group Creative Company, and we essentially help organizations lead through strategic leadership and build capacity. So, really excited to be on with these fellas and just looking forward to giving you some tips around how you can fund your faith based organization.
Fantastic.
Good evening, all. It is a pleasure for me to be in this space on tonight. I'm Dr. Carlos Perkins. I walk into this space in really two major roles. One, as the Associate Director of Engagement for the Lake Institute on Faith and Giving. We'll talk a little bit about the work at Lake. We are a part of the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy at Indiana University, Indianapolis. That is our new name, our new branding, formerly IUPUI. Been there doing the work of engaging our diverse congregational networks and the work that Lake does. I also come to this space as a senior pastor. I serve as a senior pastor of Bethel Cathedral African Methodist Episcopal Church in the city of Indianapolis, where we celebrated 187 years a few months ago. So I am happy to be in this space, and we'll approach this conversation from really those two perspectives.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Kerwin Webb, and I too come to this work from two areas. One, I'm an innovation coach with an organization called Ministry Incubators, and I also am a national coordinator of justice and mission engagement with the American Baptist Home Mission Societies. For the last 5 or 7 years, I've been doing nonprofit development work. So I'm an organizational development consultant on the side, and I bring all of that together to try to help organizations grow and thrive in the way that they can serve their constituents the best. So looking forward to a great conversation.
Wow, you guys bring all kinds of things to this conversation, and we are so excited about getting it going tonight. So, we're talking about faith funds, empowering churches through smart funding. And there are some buzzwords in this community, that we know that maybe people that are listening to us might be a little daunting, might not understand in layman's terminology. Before we springboard into the depth of this conversation, can you guys give us a little bit when we're talking about a brief overview of sustainability for churches and sources of funding for churches? Can you kind of maybe talk to us about what's available out there and learn layman's terminology, some of the things we may get into tonight to help people understand what this conversation is going to be about? Who wants to take a stab at it?
So I can jump in and talk a little bit about the work of the Lake Institute. So the Lake Institute sits at the intersection of faith and giving. Really two topics that as we travel the country, as we travel the world, and share the different programs and education opportunities, folks don't necessarily want to talk about, right? We don't want to talk about faith, and we definitely don't want to talk about money, and we don't want to talk about faith and money together. But that's a space where we live, and we absolutely love talking to faith leaders and denominational leaders and folks that are working in faith adjacent organizations about generosity and giving. Lake Institute offers really three main things. One, we do research. We are part of the Lilly School of Philanthropy, great research team. You might see research, annual research project like the Given USA report that we help publish every year that talks about giving across the nonprofit sector, where we've seen a growth or decline in giving. We do research on religious giving, right? What affluent givers looking for, especially in religious institutions. We just published a report about Latinx giving, Latinx and philanthropy. We have a report out that talks about giving within Black context. We do focus group, and so research is a major part of the work that we do. The second part of what we do is really working with offering educational programs. And two main programs. One is our executive certificate in religious fundraising. This is about a 20-hour course that we travel around the country or engage audiences virtually in this course. It is a part of a certificate course that is offered to religious leaders, and you can go on our website and find out so much about it. In that course, we dig deep into what we mean by religious fundraising, because oftentimes religious leaders don't see themselves as fundraisers, but in fact we are. And I tell pastors all the time that you get an awesome opportunity that every week many of us get to interface with our donors. And how do you nurture those donors? And so I'll talk a little bit about the work about nurturing donors in our executive certificate program. Our second education program that we offered is a course, a seminar called Cultivating Generous Congregations. And while our executive certificate is geared towards pastors, our Cultivating Generous Congregation is geared towards the pastor and the lay leadership, individuals within your congregation that has influence in making decisions, can help to cultivate and generate some generosity within your context. And the third thing that we do at Lake is to offer public conversations. We offer annual Lake Lecture where we bring in somebody that's doing major work across the world in a lecture series at the university in Indianapolis, or we sponsor community of practice. I'm getting ready to do a community of practice with Latinx, Hispanic pastors and leaders in Philadelphia in about 2 weeks. And so we try to engage in the conversation around how do you cultivate generosity within your own context. That I think fits right in the conversation tonight. So I'm honored to be here and look forward to engaging the audience in some more questions.
Okay. All right. Anybody else wanted to jump in on that before we move on? Sustainability sources, what's available? I think that might segue us right into Shanika,
Sure.
Dr. Yeah, I think it might, as your approach pretty much is about strategic philanthropy.
Right.
Maybe we
So
can
yeah,
talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so my approach is probably a little different because I think I am the Reverend Doctor on the panel. So, my approach would be looking at sustainability from a perspective of just like a faith-based organization, especially if you are a faith-based organization that has a separate 501(c)(3, approaching it from a perspective of how do we last, right? So sustainability is about how do you build resources so that your organization can last into eternity or as long as you would like for it to last, and to be able to do that work in a way that you can sustain it. And you do that through diversifying your funding streams. And so that may include looking at it from a perspective of individual gifts, which from a faith-based organization, you're already doing that through donations or offering, right? Taking it a step further, sponsorship, you get those a lot through events. So you already are doing some of this in your daily practice, but you may be calling it something else. But just taking that approach to diversifying your funding stream so that all your eggs are not in one basket. So I would say looking at sponsorships, looking at individual donations or giving, because a lot of people say, yeah, we want grants, but a big misconception is that grants is the number one source of funding, and it's not. It's individual giving. So, just again, looking at those different types. So corporate gifts. But when you look at some of this, you're going to have to approach it a little different and step out of that faith-based framework and really look at the community outreach work that you're doing, because that's how you position yourself to go for funding from foundations and some of these outside sources outside of your congregation. So that would kind of be what I would add to the conversation.
Okay.
Can I ask a question? You mentioned the faith-based organization with a separate 501c3.
Yeah.
Is that necessary? Is that the better way? Because I've seen and heard people do both. So I wonder if you could help me understand benefits of each avenue.
Sure. So my background is 15 years in philanthropy. I tell my people I'm a purple unicorn. So started out kind of in the grant making space, did fiduciary and then fundraising. So the benefits of having the separate 501c3, a church by nature is a nonprofit, right? But without that 501c3, it's going to limit your ability to apply for certain things, because charitable or philanthropic foundations or funders, they usually require that 501c3 as a requirement. So that allows you to kind of do that mission work, but from a perspective of community outreach. So what you may typically, if you do not have that 501c3 designation, you may be paying for this out of, the church's budget, out of your operating support, versus if you have this 501c3 and you're able to set up separate community programs or outreach, then you're able to get grants for that particular program or service that you're providing. And to take it a step further, say for example you have like a church that may offer like a thrift store. That's an income generating program that comes back into that nonprofit. So of course you would want to talk with a tax professional around the implications of each, but that's kind of the benefits of having that separate 501c3, because it takes you out of that specific religious realm and you can still do that faith-based work, but it's more general versus saying, a specific denomination, which could be considered as discriminatory in a philanthropic perspective because it only reaches out to one particular denomination.
All right, one more before I let you go.
Sure.
Boards, the leaders of, can it be the same board for the faith-based organization and the nonprofit, or does there have to be a difference or anything like that? Any requirements around that?
Yeah, no, all of that's going to be set up when you create your organizational bylaws and your articles of incorporation. So with 501c3s, of course, you have to file it at the federal level to get that designation, but you also have to file articles of incorporation at the state level. And you would name your officers just like if you went to the bank, like those authorized signers. So you would put within that paperwork how many board members you have, what committees you would have, and who's responsible for what or have certain authorities.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Myra, may I layer a little bit of what Dr. Shanika just shared? You're trying to get out of this, Kerwin. You're supposed to be responding to questions and not asking the questions. But let me. One of the things that I talk often to faith leaders about is, while I absolutely agree that it's in some senses necessitate a separate 501c3 other than your religious organization. Your religious organization, 9 times out of 10, is a 501c3. The challenge with many faith leaders is that we lead into a moral obligation. So we know how to teach and preach, and we understand our organization as such, but we don't understand the organization as a nonprofit organization. And what I say to faith leaders is this: if your church were to close today, will your community miss it? Are you having impact in the community where you're located? And if the answer to that is yes, then for me, that is evidence that you understand not only your moral obligation in teaching and preaching, but you also understand your nonprofit organization and making a difference in the community. That means you're addressing needs that are close and are there where you're located. And folks are interested in funding programs and services that address needs in community.
Oh, that's good. That's really, really good. If you're listening tonight, and I know you are, you have questions, please, please, please. If you have questions for our panels, we have some we're going to keep organically discussing here, but go ahead and type your question if you'd like in the comments, and we'll be watching those as well so that we can give information to. So you've been kind of in the hot seat for starters, Dr. Shanika, and starting off tonight, it's amazing. But I think it's a good springboard to ask directly how strategic philanthropy can be a game changer for local churches looking to
Okay.
secure their financial future. Let's Do you mind if we start there
Yeah, let's
tonight?
start there. So I think it's like the strategic piece is prioritizing what the focus is. And like Dr. Perkins said, it's really around what difference and the impact you're making in your community. Because if there's no behavior change from the work that you're doing, like kind of what's the good of doing it, right? So it has to be purposeful and intentional. So pick your number kind of 1 through 3, your top programs or services that you're providing, especially from a lay perspective of what do we need in our community. And so I'm a big proponent of assessing your church population, right? So doing again, taking these nonprofit practices and bringing them into the faith-based realm, and really like looking and say, hey, what is it that we do well? Who are our community partners, and what are the gaps in the community? Because you have to address the gaps, because if not, you're replicating services. So again, just really taking that kind of that snapshot of what's going on, what partners do we need, who do we need to bring to the table, and not working in silo. Like tap into the nonprofit community, tap into the school system, tap into other faith-based partners so that you maximize that impact around the work that you're doing. And then within your own church, identifying 2 or 3 priorities that you can focus on, and recognize that Rome wasn't built in a day. So it may take time, and then you put into place, KPI. So what are your key performance indicators? What are the benchmarks that you are measuring your program success up to? And be okay with pivoting as well, because sometimes it doesn't work, but you have to try different things to figure out what works for your congregation. And I think one of the things that's really important, especially in kind of like this digital world, is sometimes you've got to have tunnel vision and not do that comparison thing and worry about what everyone else is doing, and do what works for your congregation, your church, and the community that you serve. So I think that's really important in, just assessing where you're at. After you make that assessment, determine, the strategic priorities, and then what does the action plan look like, so that from a priority perspective, what are the resources that we need in order to prepare to execute this strategy?
I think you bring up an amazing point when you mention silos. Of course, most of us in the church world, we have this vision for our church and what God has called us to do. And we're going to do our thing because it's our vision. But you brought out the importance of partnerships, which I think brings a great segue, even the more, Dr. Carlos, into asking you to kind of share a little bit um, about how you see, from your experience, your Lake Institute, Faith and Giving, and all of your experiences, how do you really see the relationship between faith communities and philanthropy evolving?
Oh wow, this is the space where I live, breathe, and try to make a difference. um, so we are in the midst right now of having this conversation about the faith community, and can I be specific? The Black and Brown faith communities and organized philanthropy. The Lake Institute, along with Gary Theological Seminary in Chicago, sponsored a symposium last year titled Philanthropy in the Black Church. Would love to share that. And just check out the Lake Institute website. We have a full report from that symposium. And we learned so many things from that symposium. One, the way that organized philanthropy view the Black church experience. And secondly, our inability to clearly note and articulate the impact that the Black church as an anchor institution has had in our community. For example, we've been doing the work. We've been doing the work through our tithes and offering to the generosity of the congregation. We just don't have that in writing. And what Dr. Shanika was sharing, we don't know how to put that down in what we call in a message map? How do you articulate the 2 or 3 things that your congregation does well to impact the greater community? If I were to say to you as a faith leader, what is the message? What is the theme? What's the purpose of your organization, right? As a nonprofit organization, you can tell me to save souls and to will souls for Christ, and that's what we're in this for. But we're also in this to transform community. So what message do you want folks to understand about your organization? And so there's so much to be learned about the relationship between the faith community and organized philanthropy. Can I also say on this platform that the predominantly white faith communities have been able to access organized philanthropy for years, right? And in the Black and brown space, our role, our job, is then to help our brothers and sisters to how do you position your organization so that you can have access to, not only grants, but also other opportunities to be able to do the work that we are called to do.
I want to add to that because I think it's super important. And I think taking that messaging a step further is like, even from a perspective, like we're online nowadays, right? So adding that message to your content creation or your digital content strategy and showing up in that messaging, and even as a church, like creating an impact report that says, this is what we did in our community over the course of the year. Like, tell that story, brag about it, pastor it, put it everywhere so that people can see, like yell to the mountaintop, so that people know what you're doing in order to be able to support you. And I think using the story to make that ask, and tying that into your donor appeals, as you do that community outreach.
And that at some level, that at some level requires a shift in our theology. Can I just get it a little bit? Because oftentimes many faith leaders that I interact with say, well, we do the work, but we don't need to boast about the work. And I'm saying what Dr. Shanika is saying, no, you need to be able to tell a good story. Folks want to hear. Folks want to know the impact that you're having on community. And in order for you to do that, you have to be able to tell a story. That means on Sunday mornings, you have to be able to tell a story. When folks check out your ministry virtually, your ministry should tell a story about the work that you're doing locally.
Wow.
So you said it requires a shift in theology. I think it's going to require a shift in a whole lot more than that, because we don't talk about, like you said in your intro, we don't like to talk about money. We don't like to talk about church. And when you put them together, that's it. In the work that I've done with ministry incubators and the work that I do with the Home Mission Society, some of the most difficult conversations are the ones that deal with money. And some people, when they hear you talking about promoting and telling the story to get money, they feel like you're making it too much of a business, right? Like these are the blocks, the roadblocks that keep a lot of faith leaders, I believe, from exploring these opportunities at sustainable funding. In some of my work with consulting and leading with trying to help nonprofits and churches, I had a conversation with a leader in a church 2018, 2019. And I said to him at that point, hey, you do realize that the days of funding your ministry primarily through tithes and offerings, that's gone. Like, you have to. And this person argued me down and said, nope, that's the only way we're going to do it. And so at that point, it's you're almost hindering the growth and any opportunities, because the mindset isn't even open to new suggestions and ideas. So change in theology, but also a change in mindset that if God has called us to do this amazing work, God has the resources for it. It's just our job to find it and allow it to flow.
Yeah, I am. Yeah, Dr.
I was
Carlos.
just going to add. Thank you, Reverend. We share in our course that we have to look at religious fundraising differently than we have historically looked at fundraising. We have an exercise that we do when we ask our participants to say, when I say fundraising, what comes to mind? Oftentimes it's chicken dinner, right? It's a fundraising banquet. Those of us that have gone through building project is selling the bricks, right? And instead looking at fundraising as an opportunity to invite others into a vision that is so exciting that you want to be a part of it. A matter of fact, it is a God vision that God is inviting you to partner with him on. And that sounds great, but I've gotten pushback to say that feels a little bit like manipulation, right? And my response has been, it feels and sounds like that for us because of our experience with money and our cultural context of which we come to this conversation. I do want to honor my colleague that dropped that report in the chat on Facebook. So my colleague Tasha Gibson is on, and she was able to drop that report from Philanthropy in the Black Church in the chat on Facebook.
Listen, this conversation is making my baby leap. I hear organ music and I want to run. But I need to sit here and keep facilitating this conversation, right? I'm getting so excited because I'm hearing so much, and I'm looking at the chat and I'm seeing so much, and so much is being said. I'm hearing us talk in oneness, although we come from some different perspectives and we bring different things here. I'm hearing about the message mapping. I'm hearing about telling the story and knowing how to tell the story. And I'm hearing about giving differently and fundraising differently and how we have to shift. That brings me to talking about a little bit about what traditional fundraising, that I think most of us that may be listening understands that in our context. Listen, the fish fries, right? The bricks. You brought up the bricks. I forgot to mention the bricks, the teas, the rallies, the barbecues, particularly in North Carolina, right? And all of those places. But could you guys share, and we're going to go back to you in just a little bit too, Dr. Shanika, about having a strategic mission and all of that. But can you give us just some general out of the box fundraising ideas and concepts for the time that we're in now? Innovative.
Right. So it's simple. And I mean, I think all the things that you described, those are the small as huge. Like I grew up in a rural AME church. Like we did those fundraisers and did a lot with it. And just take that to a different level. So something really easy that they do in the nonprofit world is set up a giving day. Like, and you have so much history in your church that you can pick whatever number you want around it. And so what I mean by that is I'm a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. So for example, we may do a giving day and ask every member to donate $19.08 for our founding year. You could do that for your founding church. It could be if you're coming up on a signature milestone anniversary, say if it's your 125th, ask every member to donate $125, like on a certain date, and then you lead up, and then you get someone within the congregation that may have the means to match that gift, and then you're able to maximize it. And that's a really simple way that's really low return on the investment. All you're having to do is kind of do some marketing on your social media. I'm pretty sure most churches have a newsletter, and if you don't, you should have a virtual newsletter, because again, that's a way that you can solicit just around different programs. And it's not solicitation if you're connecting it back into the thing that has the impact. So say you have a youth program and we're going to send 50 youth to a conference. There's your impact right there. You know where those dollars are going and you know why you need it. Again, I'm a big proponent of just doing simple things. So you could do something as simple as a donor appeal, and that could be and theme it out, right? So we're in Women's History Month. Like you could have done a whole appeal for the month of March around different women in your church, the mother of the church, and we want to raise a certain amount of money to celebrate mother. Those checks are going to come in like that. But again, you have to connect it back into a cause. It has to be intentional and purposeful so that people, you got to move people's heartstrings to get to their dollars.
Let's go a little further in this conversation. And
Okay.
that's great. I hear that because a lot of times our giving is restricted in that tithe offering program. But we usually solicit the same group of people who cook the food, who buy the food, who it's the same. How can we do some other innovative things that we're not using the same people? Kerwin, I would love to hear you're in your innovative funding, and then I'd love for you to kind of spin off it as well, Dr. Perkins.
A couple of things that I think. A lot of us know about Netflix and our subscriptions, right? An innovative idea would be to see if you can get subscriptions for people to do, like if there's a regular thing you're doing at your church that you can ask people to be a subscriber to, and then these funds go towards this project or this thing. And so it's just some income that you have. It could be a couple of dollars a month, but over time and with the amount of people, it starts to grow. There are also many partnerships. I heard partnerships earlier. There are places like Applebee's or some restaurants to where if you connect with them, they'll donate a portion of their proceeds from a particular day to a certain nonprofit. And so developing those relationships with the nonprofits or the partners in the area, you can have them to post up your thing and hey, come on Saturday to this pancake breakfast, and a portion of your proceeds go to support this church or this group. There are different things you can do. People in your congregations in the communities probably have a lot of gifts and talents and things that are just natural to them. Like if somebody crochets or knits or things like that, you can do like a bazaar or a sale, a rummage sale with the things that they're just creating as a way to help offset something. So it's just, we have to think beyond just the tithes, the offerings, the regular things, and say, how would a for-profit entity get income? How would they do that? And then start tapping into that a little bit. But I think the key, and I think sometimes what's missing, is that God vision that you're inviting people to support. If I give you a vision that, hey, by you supporting this, whatever I'm doing, it's going to impact the lives of 20 or 25 young people, because we're going to take them on exposure trips and they're going to get a suit and dress clothes. And then, right, people, I think, will buy into that, because we do have to deal with the fact that some people believe that the church is all about the pastor taking the money. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. That all of the money just goes to and stays there. And so when somebody sees that, oh no, I'm going to help sponsor this young person to go to college or to go to this exposure trip that they never would have gotten, I will give to that. In addition to what I'm giving to the church already. So it doesn't have to be huge things, I don't think, but it needs to be creative and ways that other people, small people, can engage with small giving consistently over time.
I'd like to note that Dr. Williams is in the background, director of Faith, Learn, Thrive. And actually, she just posted it. I was just getting ready to say it. I think a lot of times we don't realize that many businesses provide matching gifts when we donate to our church's mission focused funds. So many of us who work for corporate America, we can check to see what our corporation's commitment is to match the funds you donate. People do it all the time, United Way, and you don't realize how much they will match your own funds. And we have people in corporate America working in our churches, and we don't realize that that's a way. Yep. They will match your donation. So I was just about to say that. I know you want to jump in, Dr. Perkins. I know you do.
I do, and I feel a little bit guilty because I have some of my Lake folks just joining on Facebook, and so I know they would want me to say a few things from Lake. One, thank you, Dr. Shanika. This is one thing that I want to push on congregations. First, you need to discern the call of your congregation. I'm going to say that again. This is the tunnel vision that we mentioned before. Your organization is not called to do everything, but you're called to do something. Just as pastors and faith leaders discern their call, some of us are called to the pastoral ministry, others are teachers, some are prophets, some are working in Christian education, others are working in chaplaincy. The congregation also has a call. We do this through our course, through a vision, mission, and values exercise, right? In helping you to discern kind of where God is calling your congregation in this season, right? It might have shifted over the last 20 years. I know as a local pastor, we have been clear that our call in this season is around mental health and spirituality. And I love the work that my brothers and sisters are doing across the city of Indianapolis. But as for me and my house, we're called to deal with mental health and spirituality. And that's our call in this season. But I'll also add, just in terms of ideas of how to build resources for your local congregation. We just completed a course at Lake. It's an online course on legacy and plan giving. We don't have these conversations within Black and Brown context. To say, as a pastor, as a faith leader, that I'm going to engage in an intentional process to talk to my congregants about legacy or plan giving, right? To say to the top five tithers in the church will say, look, you can you consider giving to our congregation, after you're no longer here, so your legacy can live on, right? When I raise this topic with pastors, oftentimes, especially in the Black and brown context, oftentimes less than 10% of pastors ever engage in a conversation about legacy giving or plan giving, right? That is one way that this is a part of the work that we do. There are members that are part of our congregation that would like to see their legacy continue in the work of the congregation. So how do we continue to do that? Thank you, Tasha. Tasha is one of our staff members at Lake, and she just put it up there, a legacy giving course that just ended. And so we want to talk to faith leaders about, how do you have this congregation conversation within your congregation? Right? How do you talk about plan giving? Like, you're not able to give $100,000 this year, but can you give it over 70 years? Right? Can you make us a part of your will and testament? Right? We're afraid of death, but we interface with it every day. Right? And there are members of our congregation that would love their legacy to live on in the work that we're doing.
Can you speak a little bit more in layman's terminology? Just a little bit more. I know that was real simple, but let's not assume. Can you go a little bit deeper and specifically what resources are needed? I know we put the link up there, but give me an idea, or give our listeners an idea on what's needed to kind of launch Legacy Giving Initiative. What does that look like? How do we start the conversation? What does that actually mean?
Absolutely. Let me jump a little bit in this. So legacy giving is creating an opportunity where individuals can give to the longevity of the institution. Endowments, right? So is there a program or overall endowment that you have for your institution? For us, as a local pastor, we have Bethel Historic Society that has preserved our history over the last 187 years. I've talked to my leaders about endowing.
Uh-oh. Okay, that's all right. We will come back. Either of you want to jump in a little bit?
Sure. So, with planned giving and endowments, it's really just, again, it's a state planning tool. So I think what he means by that is, having that last will of testament and leaving your church as the named beneficiary or a partial beneficiary. And that's a simple conversation of just having that paperwork, available where your congregation member can fill that out, or, doing a workshop. I would elaborate a little bit more, kind of again in that same scope of these big house fundraising institutions. I did higher ed fundraising for 5 years. So taking the approach of the donor engagement cycle, right? So it's like, look at fundraising or building relationships like dating, right? So the first phase is identification. So you have to identify those potential donors. So this is like building that pipeline out, and this is how you expand your reach outside of your congregation. So identifying who you may want to ask for money, right? And then after you've identified them, you need to qualify. So qualification phase is around, do they have the resources to give the gift that I'm thinking about? Because what you don't want to do is waste your time with someone that doesn't have the financial capacity to give at that major, we call it major gifts. So that's usually above a certain kind of like 5-figure gift level. And then the third phase is cultivation. So taking that time to get to know that potential donor. So you're not going to go and ask someone to put the church in the wheel the first time you meet them. But if it's, someone that's been in the church and they have a family history there, that may be, you've cultivated that relationship to where you feel comfortable having that conversation. And I know it sounds morbid, but people die and they have wills and they give money away. And the bequest is like one of the top 3 ways that charitable giving is done. And so again, planning tool. So just looking at that cultivation piece, and then after you cultivated that relationship, then you get to that point of where you're going to make the ask. So that's the solicitation, but you need to be clear around everyone being on the same page, and going back to kind of that endowment or that major gift conversation, not making a premature ask to where you get like a smaller amount than what you could have done if you cultivated that relationship. And then after you've gotten the gift, the last part of the donor engagement cycle is stewardship. So how does that donor want to be recognized? Not how you want to recognize them. They may want to remain anonymous because they don't want a lot of people coming asking them for gifts. So if they want to remain anonymous, you need to keep that information anonymous. Or they may want, the parsonage named after them, and you can do that. So it's just having that conversation around what is their donor intent behind getting this gift and what that recognition looks like. And that's how you're able to kind of, I think, expand your reach out of that traditional tithes and offering framework when you're approaching money and fundraising in the faith-based space.
Dr. Shanika, so if a congregation has not had leadership or has not thought in that way, how long do you think it would take for them to shift to beginning to cultivate donors and thinking that through? Is it something that can be done in a couple of months, or is it more of a longer term process?
I mean, I think with anything, it's going to be a process. I think it's going to depend on kind of your membership and your leadership. If you have someone that is a visionary leader that can, explain it in a way that people understand it and get behind it, they may look very different. And of course, we know that you may also have some people that are more traditional and they're going to be a little bit more restrictive in approaching it from an open mind. So I think it's really around educating people and informing them to where they have the knowledge and you have the resources available.
And would you say that there a certain education, because what you're saying, I'm familiar with, I understand it, but I'm trying to think of some of the smaller churches that I know and serve, and the volunteers who are serving on the trustee board or the deacon board, they may not know about all of these things, right?
Right. So think about it like this. Within your church, we all have different prominent professions, right?
Yeah.
So if this is something that is totally foreign to you and you don't have resources, I would start with, hey, do we have either a financial planner in our in the congregation? One, do we have a estate attorney? Two, do we have someone that maybe works in the nonprofit space or a fundraiser? Those are 3 or 4 really good people that could probably come and do a very simple workshop and answer questions, right? And then there's a ton of great resources. Like, for example, Council of Foundations has information around setting up some of these different tools. Any university has a page that breaks down, how to, establish a estate planning tool. So it's just really kind of doing that research. But if you're a smaller organization, like, kind of start within the talent and resources that you have and the gifts within your congregation, because if you have someone that does, again, financial planning or retirement planning, they can talk to you about at a very high level around what this means.
Gotcha. Okay.
I think it's important, and we're so grateful at Faith Learn Thrive to be able to provide this information to you in the chat. Tasha Gibson actually put there a whole course on the legacy giving. And we're all talking about, and welcome back, Dr. Carlos. Great to have you back. We're continuing the conversation. So go ahead and copy that. There are resources available to our community. And part of our job is trying to make these things make you aware, bringing people in to provide resources. We have resources that we have not tapped into, which is part of the conversation. You were going to jump in and say something?
I was going to offer for those that are watching, reach out, send us an email at the Lake Institute. If you're interested in any one of these courses, we have some resources that we might be able to help you. We're getting ready to offer 2 weeks from now, we're offering a course in Philadelphia. Later on in April, May, I'm down in North Carolina, and then I'm coming back to North Carolina. And so if you're anywhere up and down the East Coast, we would love to be able to connect with you, especially executive certificate and religious fundraising. And for those that might be specifically, and I was hearing the conversation, trying to get back on, but I was on Facebook around legacy giving. That is a brand new short course for us. We just tested out. It went great, and we want to be able to offer that to so many different audiences in terms of, if you're wrestling, thinking about this, it takes work. And oftentimes it requires a faith leader to be able to learn about these things, sometimes to be able to bring it to their congregation. So we are here at Lake Institute and would love to partner with you in offering some of these resources to you.
Thank you. I was looking in the chat, and church growth strategist Nicole Johnson mentioned when we were talking about giving and using the same people to give the money and do this. And she mentioned businesses. I think we should highlight that. Businesses will also donate physical products such as food, tables, chairs, toys, or other things. And so I think that leads us to the question of how important is it that churches have a strategic mission in focus before soliciting support through grants and donations?
I think we've said that about 3-4 times. Be clear about what's your call. Like, you can't ask folks to support stuff that you're not even clear about, right? Or things that you're not called to do, right? You're not the expert in this area. You're not there, folks that are, or you're unwilling to partner with others to do the work. I spent some time last week with our team, with a group of individuals that receive a grant to do some work in compelling preaching. One of the things that we talked about is, how to ensure that the program that's being funded is a part of the overall strategic plan for the institution that it's a part of. Because when we talk about sustainability, oftentimes you will get to a place where you get some grant funds to fund a particular program, but that program never become a part of the overall mission and goal of the institution that it's embedded in. And so making sure that you are clear about your vision, your mission, and your values, right? If you're going to ask folks for money to support your work, that you can come back and say, we are clear about this. This is how we're going to do it. This is how long it's going to take. And we might come back and ask for some sustainability money. But if not, over the next 3 or 4 years, we're able to reach out and plug others in to be able to support the work that we're doing.
I'm going to take it a step further and say that you really need to focus on outcomes, and being able to articulate your results and measuring success. Because if you can't articulate that impact, you're not going to have anything. A lot of funders, they want to know, who did you serve? How did you serve them? And what was the behavior change as a result of our dollars?
Yeah.
And if you can't articulate what behavior changed as a result of their dollars, you're probably not going to get funded again. So you really want to make sure that you are measuring that, and some easy ways that you can do that. And so when I say measure impact, we're really talking about evaluating what worked, what didn't work, what was successful, what did you learn, what could you do differently? And that may be something as simple as, if you have a program, doing a pre-assessment or a pre-survey and then doing a post-survey and seeing what did they learn as a result of that. Another really easy metric is, something as simple as how many people attended that particular session, or counting attendance. Okay, we said we had 100 people that were going to show up, 125 people show up. So just making sure that you're focused on the data and that your programs and your services are data informed, because if not, you're not going to have the information that you need to support your programs and your services and that ask that you're making. And I think the other big thing to think about, if you're applying for grants or if you're asking for sponsorships, is that making sure that the budget is realistic with the dollar amount that you're asking for as well.
I'll add on to that as far as strategic. This comes to your partners. Like Dr. Carlos said, you can't do everything, but that doesn't mean that the community doesn't need multiple things done. And so having a history of working with collaborative partners in the area strengthens any grant application that you're putting out, because a lot of funders want to see that you aren't trying to do it yourself, because they recognize the limitations. And then documenting as much as you can, so that you can pull those reports or you can pull those stats that funders are going to need. Because a lot of those grant applications, they're going to ask you, who are you partnering with? How long have you been partnered with them? What types of projects have you done together? And I think a lot of our churches do those things intuitively. It's just we don't document and don't tell the story well. And so what I'd suggest is think back for the last 5 years, the big things that you've done. Start making a list of those. Think about the partners and stuff like that, and start building out your framework so that if you haven't been keeping the data, you have a place to start, and then just go from there as you continue to do it.
Mm.
And I think a cheat sheet to kind of go into what Reverend Webb said was just like create a program profile, like a one-page fact sheet of kind of what you've done, and then that way you can easily reference it. In the fundraising realm, I tell people to create a grant narrative for each of your programs, and then that way you can kind of tweak it as you go. Like, that's a whole nother conversation, but then you're not reinventing the wheel. Like, there's certain information like your mission, your vision, your value, that doesn't change. Your If you have that IRS determination letter, put all that in a shared Google Doc, so that is easily accessible, so that way you're working smarter and not harder. So, and then when you create that profile, share it with all the members. Like, you can have a Google document that you can share with everybody that needs to have access to it.
Okay. I'm hearing data. I'm hearing telling the story. I'm hearing important things of keeping up with all of your stuff so that you can. I'm hearing a lot on partnership. Um, what about? Let's talk a little bit more about sustainability. A little bit more when we get these grants, when we get these. Let's talk a little bit about what role can faith play in encouraging a culture of giving and sustainability, or maybe even in this, Dr. Carlos, maybe what is the most important thing in creating a plan for sustainability? When you get these funds, let's say you get a grant, and we could do this thing. How do we keep sustainability? How do we keep it going?
Absolutely. So our space on this is cultivating generosity, right? Is how do you build within many of our contexts where we serve, our faith has always been generous, right? So one of the professors at IUPUI or IU Indianapolis, Professor Tyrone, shared the story of Madam C.J. Walker. It's a part of his research. Talks about her, Madam C.J. Walker, being generous. Madam C.J. Walker did not wait until she became a millionaire to be generous. She was always generous. If you look at her life when she moved to St. Louis, the Women's Missionary Society of the African Methodist Episcopal Church took her in and her daughter and offered her support. Her generosity was birthed out of her faith. When she moved to Indianapolis and launched her business, her generosity, she joined Bethel AME Church, where I honored the pastor, so I know the story well. She was generous. When she moved to New York, after her death, there's a story of the NAACP sharing that they wouldn't be in existence if it wasn't for the generosity of Madam C.J. Walker. And so generosity has always been a part of our faith. As a faith leader, then our role, then how do we cultivate or nurture that generosity? One of the exercises that we share with pastors in our courses, to take a inventory or take a list of all the folks, and especially those that are pastoring small and mid-sized churches, right? Take a list of all the givers in your church. And what you will find is that the top 20, 30% of your givers give 95% of your income, right? What you will find, the top 10% gives about 70% of your income for the year. So if we go with the numbers, right, and this shows us from research, if you go with the numbers that the top 30% gives about 95%, that means the bottom 70% only gives 5%, right? Knowing that, you are empowered now to cultivate or nurture the generosity of your congregation, right? So why aren't those folks given at a higher level? Maybe because you're not clear about what they're given to. Maybe there are folks that are like me or younger than I am, millennials or Gen Zs or Gen Z Alpha, that says, I'm not giving to your building fund. I have to give to something that I can see that's going to impact community. So if you're doing a community outreach project, I'll write a check, but don't ask me for a tithe or offering every week, right? You have to learn that. There is research out there that we share with faith leaders about giving trends. Who are the people that are given and what are they given to? Right? And how then do you um, uh, position your faith-based organization, your church, your congregation in a way that you're best suited for funds to sustain the work that you're called to do? Right? If you have a grant, if you have some outside funding to support a program that you're doing, we need to do all that we shared before. You have to collect data. You have to write an impact report. You have to provide your grant report to the grantors when they're due, right? Because folks want to know where their money's going, because they're folks that are interested in funding the work, right? We just have to be able to articulate what we're called to do.
My God, that was good. That was really, 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 really good. We have maybe about 5 or 6 minutes, and I want to just keep listening to you guys. But I would like for you to take maybe a minute and a half, 2 minutes each. Imagine you're on the World Wide Web and you are helping millions of pastors and churches. Let's just go with that, right? I want you, in the context of our conversation tonight, what do you think you can leave with us? What would you like to say to give us the greatest impact? Whether it's about sustainability, whether it's about faith funds and giving smart, training our congregations, whatever it is, give us your best impactful last statements tonight that we can take home with us.
I'll go first so that then I can sit back and receive what they have, because so brilliant minds. I will say that communication is key. And I say that meaning that if you have churches, because of the work that they do and the lives that they touch, there's a story that is there that if it is told in such a way to where it grabs people's minds and their ears and their hearts, they're going to lean in. And generosity is sort of a faith thing, right? And so communicate well with the people who are in your pews or in the church, because sometimes they have ideas that could help you if we would listen. Communicate well with the people outside of the doors and let them know that, hey, I'm not just paying the light bill with this that you're giving me, but this is going to do X, Y, Z, whatever those things are. And then communicate well with those who you are seeking to attract as far as the larger donors and the community at large, because as churches, they're usually pillars, anchors. 180 something years, I think Dr. Carlos said that his congregation has been in the place. That legacy and that history, funders like those types of things because, one, sometimes that's a tax break for me, right? I get to say that I'm doing a good thing and I get a financial benefit behind it, but also I get to tell the story that I helped this congregation to help send 50 students out of the country for a trip that they would not have ever been able to do. So communication, learning how to tell your story better, learning how to communicate better inside, and then learning how your organization's story should be shaped in the public square, so that people will recognize and say, oh yeah, you want to support this organization.
Let me add to that really two things. And I'm using two direct quotes that we use in our course. One is from Henry Nouwen that simply says that fundraising is precisely the opposite of begging. Rather, we are declaring we have a vision that is amazing and exciting. And those that are listening to us this evening, I want you to walk away from this conversation thinking about fundraising or religious fundraising or generosity in that sense. The second thing that I will add is another quote. It comes from the Generosity Project, written by Christian Smith and Hillary Davidson, that simply says that generosity is the virtue of giving good things to others freely and abundantly. And like other virtues, generosity is learned. And because generosity is learned, it is our obligation as faith leaders that we have to be able to teach it.
Mm.
You have to teach the folks that God has assigned to you how to continue to be generous. We call it in the fundraising world cultivating donors, cultivating congregations, practicing religious fundraising, and integrating all of that in what we do.
And I guess I would wrap up and I would just say show up authentically. Like show up. Like, and when I say show up, as the kids would say, stand on business. Like show up authentically and be the leader that you wish that you had. I mean, how many times have we heard about people leaving church because of bad leadership? So whether that's a stewardship of funds, stewardship of programs, show up. And when you do that, make sure that you know you're intentional and that you have an impact behind it and that you're there for the right reasons. And then just being authentic, all the other things are going to come to play. Because let's be real, if God called us to do this work, He's going to equip us with the tools and the resources that we need. So don't be afraid to do that hard work and show up and ask those questions. And again, when you're approaching fundraising, approach it how you would want someone to approach you. And remember that fundraising is simply just building the relationship. So show up authentically, cultivate and build those relationships, and just focus on the impact. And then the story will tell itself if you're clear around the why behind what you're doing.
Wow. I would say, with all that you said, ditto to all of that, but how important it is to tap into the resources. They are available to us. We want to encourage you to join us, Faith, Learn, Thrive, on April 11th at 7 p.m. For another webinar, Empowering Churches, the Art of Corporate Solicitation. And Dr. Shanika is going to be with us again on that. We want to thank tonight. Oh my God, I'm so full. I'm so thrilled to be able to sit in the seat tonight. Once again, our director, Dr. Williams, is in the background tonight. And on behalf of herself and me and Faith, Learn, Thrive, and all of the pastors and the people that's listening everywhere, we want to thank you guys. Dr. Carlos Perkins, we want to thank you, Reverend Kerwin Webb. We want to thank you, Dr. Shanika McKeever, for being with us tonight. As we've had this talk, FaithFunds, empowering churches through smart funding. This has been recorded, and we want you to join us again. Please spread the word about Faith, Learn, Thrive, and all that we want to be a resource. And that's why we're all here. We're bringing us all together so that we can help build this body of Christ. Dr. Rona says, hello, everyone, and thank you for joining the conversation tonight. And hopefully we'll see you on April 11th. Thank you guys so much for your time tonight. Have a great night. We'll see you. Bye now.